Sometimes the simplest questions hide the deepest dangers. That's exactly what we see in Matthew chapter 19. The Pharisees ask Jesus a seemingly straightforward question about divorce, but it's actually a masterfully laid trap. In this explainer, we're going to unpack how Jesus not only sidestepped this trap, but completely turned the tables, lifting the whole conversation from petty human rules to God's original divine design.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll travel to this really tense place called Perea to set the scene. Then, we're going to dissect that tricky question from the Pharisees and the whole war of words behind it. After that, we'll see how Jesus brilliantly responds by going back to God's original blueprint for marriage. And finally, we'll look at how he reframes the law of Moses, not as a command, but as a concession for, well, a hardened heart.
All right, first up, we're taking a journey into Perea. And trust me on this, to really get the danger Jesus was walking into, you've got to understand where he was. In this story, location is absolutely everything. So, Matthew 19, verses 1 and 2 tell us that Jesus has left Galilee and come to the region beyond the Jordan. Now, that might sound like just a little travel update, but it's not. It is a massive piece of the puzzle. He's essentially leaving a pretty safe area and walking right into a new and way more dangerous territory. And here's why that matters so much. Perea, that was Herod Antipas's turf. And yes, this is the exact same Herod who had just had John the Baptist arrested and beheaded. And what was John's crime? He publicly called out Herod's messed up marriage to his own brother's wife. So you can imagine, for Jesus to even bring up the topic of marriage and divorce here, well, he's not just stepping on toes, he's walking straight into a political minefield.
Okay, that brings us to our second part, the Pharisees' dangerous question. Now that we know the political climate, their little inquiry is going to sound a whole lot less innocent, right?
All right, check out verse 3. The text is super clear about their motive. It says they came tempting him, which is just another way of saying they were trying to trap him. And here's the question they lob at him. Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Pay close attention to those last three words, for every cause. That's the big. So, what do you think? Is this just a simple question about the law? Or is it something way, way more clever, like a perfect trap designed to snap shut no matter how he answered?
This is where you can really see the genius, the wicked genius maybe, of their trap. It had like 3 different ways it could go wrong for Jesus. First, if he gives a super strict answer against divorce, boom, he's in direct conflict with Herod, and we all know how that ended for John the Baptist. Second, they could force him to pick a side in this really nasty debate between 2 famous rabbinical schools, which would tick off half the people there no matter what he said. And third, they could just bog him down in a word game about Mosaic law versus what people were actually doing. Seriously, any direct answer was a landmine.
Okay, to really get just how clever that second part of the trap was, we need to hit pause on the story for a second. We've got to unpack this war of words. Let's dive into the legal and rabbinic feud that was basically raging at the time.
So the whole debate boiled down to how you interpreted one little phrase back in the book of Deuteronomy. You had the school of Shammai, who were super strict. They said divorce was only okay for serious sexual immorality. Then you had the school of Hillel, who were much more liberal. They argued it could be for, well, any cause of displeasure. I'm talking like even for burning dinner. So when the Pharisees asked about every cause, they were literally quoting the Hillel position, trying to drag Jesus right into the middle of this huge fight. And here's where it gets even trickier, another layer to the trap. The Greek word the Pharisees actually used in their question was apolio. Now, that didn't mean what we think of as a formal legal divorce. It was more like to just put away or send away a wife. There was often no legal paperwork, which meant she couldn't remarry and couldn't even get her dowry back. It was, for all intents and purposes, unjust abandonment. So you see, this distinction is absolutely crucial. This putting away thing was a deeply abusive practice that could leave a woman in complete social and financial ruin. A proper legal divorce, the word for that was apostagion, at least required a legal document that gave her some protection. The Pharisees were deliberately asking about the abusive practice, hoping to corner Jesus in a debate about legal loopholes.
So the big question is, how does Jesus get out of this? Well, in our 4th section here, we're going to see how he masterfully sidesteps their entire trap, not by playing their game, but by appealing to a much, much higher authority.
He totally ignores the bait. Instead, in verse 4, he flips it back on them with a question of his own. Have you not read? And with that one question, he yanks the conversation all the way back to the very beginning. We're talking Genesis, before the law of Moses was even a thing.
And he keeps going in verse 5, quoting directly from Genesis, reminding them of how God himself set up marriage. And the key idea here is one flesh. See what he's doing? He's lifting the entire discussion from a man-made legal contract up to a sacred divine union.
And then comes verse 6, where he drops this powerful definitive statement. This isn't just his opinion he's offering, it's a divine principle that just slices right through all their petty legal arguments. He has completely reframed the entire issue. It's no longer about what man is allowed to do, it's about what God has joined together.
But, the Pharisees don't give up that easily. They come back with a follow-up question, which brings us to our final section, concession for a hardened heart. They think they've got him now. They're going to try and trap him with the law of Moses itself.
So in verse 7, they fire back. Well, if that's the case, why did Moses command us to give a certificate of divorce? Notice how they phrase that, as a commandment to get divorced. But Jesus immediately corrects them. He reframes it completely. It wasn't a command. It was a reluctant concession.
And Jesus' answer in verse 8 is just profound. He tells them, look, the law from Moses about a certificate of divorce, that was never God's perfect plan. That was a legal protection that had to be put in place because of human brokenness, because of the hardness of your hearts. And then right away, he points them back to that perfect original design, but from the beginning, it was not so.
And now, after setting all that groundwork, his final statement in verse 9 lands with its full weight. He comes right out and condemns that abusive practice of putting away that unjust abandonment. He basically calls it what it is, adultery. He does give one exception, fornication. The Greek word is porneia, which points to serious sexual immorality. So what he's done is brilliant. He has restored God's original high standard for marriage, while at the same time acknowledging the broken reality we live in.
So, all of this leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? By sidestepping all the legal and political traps and taking this whole debate back to God's original purpose, Jesus isn't just challenging the Pharisees, he's challenging us too. How does his focus on divine intent, instead of just human rules, push us to look beyond what's culturally convenient in our own commitments? It's a really powerful thought to wrestle with.